All right, everyone. Good evening and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is what they forgot to tell you about flipping your classroom. So if you're interested in flipping your classroom or if you've already flipped your classroom, you're in the right place today. So my name is Laura Ringer and I'm the marketing manager here at CK12. I'm joined today with a few of my colleagues and we're going to get you through today's webinar. So thank you so much for joining. So today we're going to talk about how to manage a flipped classroom, the curation of videos, how to assign homework. Then we're going to go into a little demo about how to use CK12 quizzes to assign assignments to your students in a flipped classroom. And lastly, we're going to answer some questions. So today's speaker, we are very blessed to have Cheryl Chase on the line. Cheryl Chase is a CK12 champion. She's also a middle school science teacher in San Jose, California at St. Leo the Great School. She's been teaching for over 10 years and has her master's in education. Cheryl flipped her classroom about 3 years ago, so she has had 3 years to understand how to flip her classroom, and now she's going to pass on some knowledge to you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cheryl Chase.
We're going to talk about flipping the classroom, and most of what you're going to learn today is pretty much all the mistakes that I have made in the past, and hopefully you won't make them as well. Like Laura said, I'm a science teacher, so I always like to start with definitions, and so we're going to start with what basically is a flipped classroom. So each flipped classroom is different just as much as each traditional classroom is different. So I wanted to just kind of let you know you have permission to do whatever you want to do. There's no right or wrong way about doing it. I think that the thing I learned the most is when I'm comfortable with it, the students become comfortable with it. So if you just kind of teach how you teach, they'll get used to it and they'll love you for it. So, but as a general definition, how we're going to talk about flipped is that solo activities are done offline or with the children by themselves. So things that they could do alone, they do alone. So for instance, things like reading or watching a video or anything that they can do by themselves that they don't need another individual to do, they do offline. But the things they do in the classroom is all that collaboration activity, the activities that you have, things where they need the teacher right there sitting next to them to help them out. Now for me, that means when my students, because they're science, I teach science, when they do those calculations, that's where a lot of times my students get tripped up. And that's when I like to be right there with them so that I can help them see where they're making their errors and correct it right away. Instead of having, let's say, have a lecture, have their mom and dad, I have a lecture, I say what I need to say, they take it home, their mom and dad haven't had physics for years and years, and then they start moving them down the wrong path. Instead, what we do is we change that up. So it works out really, really super well. So what are some of the benefits of a flipped classroom? For me, it's given me much more time for active learning and that learn by doing, which I'm finding that the students that I have now really need that kind of learn by doing, that kinesthetic learning. The other thing that I love about flipped learning is that I don't have lost time on content. So those students who go away for the last period of the day who have sports and they're on the bus or whatever, they can use their own device to listen to my lecture and to get that content that they need to have. Also, students who are absent, it's none of that, well, what did I miss in class? What did I miss in class? You don't get that anymore. What I say is well, go watch the video and you'll see what we did in class. And then here, I'll work with you through the activity. Also, it's a great review prior to testing. So I find that when students, sometimes they'll come up to me right before we're going to have a test, and I give them a review sheet of some kind, and I'll say, okay, so what's it? Know the formula for acceleration. And they'll, Mrs. Chase, I forgot this, how you do that calculation. I said, okay, well, where can you find that information? And then they go to my website that shows where all that is. So it works out really well. And in fact, I've even had parents tell me that they really like this too, because when their child is doing something like studying for a test, both of them go to the video to find the information. and it works out terrific. I'm very, very happy with it. So how do you plan for a lesson that is flipped? This is where flipped learning kind of, pardon the pun, is turned on its head. Where in a traditional classroom, you stand in front of the students and you give a lecture and they give questions and then you give the answer and all of that. This is where you have to kind of start thinking a little bit differently and where that paradigm shift is going to happen. So a typical flow for me, how I do it, and again, this is just lessons. These are just lessons that that I've learned along the way. Okay, so what I typically do for science, and you can do this for social studies, you can do it for math, you can do it for anyone any subject you teach, is to kind of give an introduction activity to spark that learning. For science, people always say, well, that's super easy. But it's also really easy to do for social studies as well. So let's say you're talking about the American Revolution, for instance, and you can show them a map of North and South, or not North and South, excuse me, from where the British troops were and where the American troops were, and just show them the map and ask them what do they think is happening here. So so that's kind of an introduction activity, something that's going to spark their wanting to know about this subject. So a lot of times what happens is we put up something and we say, here, this is this, here's the answer. Instead, put up the activity or do the activity and then have them give you the answer. And oftentimes what happens is we also get where there's holes in their learning or where there's some kind of miscommunication in their learning, which is great. Then what the students do is they go home and they watch your lecture on that particular topic, and then what I have them do is a quick formative quiz. So the formative quizzes help me know whether or not they were paying attention to the lecture that I had given them. So I do a lot of formative quizzing when I flip my classroom. And then when they come back the next day, we'll review those essential questions that were in that lecture, and they have we'll have an activity, or if we're doing calculations, if we're doing friction calculations, or if we're doing any kind of chemistry calculations, whatever it is, we do that worksheet in class together, and then we move on. And this is where I can find out where the majority of the class is having issues, and I can address that right then. Then you just kind of repeat again, and again, and then I always end with some kind of cumulative lab or some kind of big project that brings all of that learning together, that has them show me what they know about this particular topic. And then, of course, they take a chapter test. Now, if your class is going to strictly project-based learning, you can just skip the chapter test. You don't need to do that, and make the lab or the project their assessment as well, because I know with Common Core, we're moving much more towards the project aspect of things and not so much the standardized testing. For me, I like to have those standardized tests because my students are going to start moving into high school. Also, if you're a high school teacher, they have those SATs that they have to take. So I always keep that chapter test standardized testing somewhere in that assessment group for me. So it kind of works like this. You start with an intro activity, go to their video recordings or reading, whatever you like, and then they do a class activity or a lab or a project. So in a nutshell, this is kind of the flow that would happen. So how do you manage a flipped classroom? Well, what I do is I start with those essential questions from that section or that chapter. What do I really want them to know at the end of it? And that's what I focus on. So I go over concepts, and in class, those essential questions are the ones that I go over in class with them. For instance, today, my students were learning about friction last night. So I came back and I asked them, what are the 4 types of friction that we have in our world? And that gave them a chance to ask the questions that they had about the video last night, it helps me see where there's some gaps in their learning as well. So it really works out well for me. So I go over those, start with those essential questions, and I ask them straight out at the beginning of class before we do any other kind of activity. Also, you can do it via a worksheet or short quizzes. Sometimes you can, if your students need a little bit more of a nudge towards this, you can give them an entrance quiz about the information that was in the video last night. Something that's pretty obvious, nothing that would cause them to trip up, but definitely things like what I just said. What are the 4 types of frictions? If I said that 4 times in the lecture, then they definitely need to know that before they come into class the next day. Again, quizzing and exit tickets are another way that I manage this. A couple tech things that I use for exit tickets is actual exit ticket. There's a website called Exit Ticket, and you can have your class log onto it and create an account, and it's free to teachers. Another one is Get It. This is one that you can use with your smartphone, and they can use with theirs as well. So they this is a real visual one. You ask a question out loud like, I understand the 4 types of friction, and then they can put they drag their finger across this bar graph and say, yes, I totally got it, or no, I'm really not understanding that at all. So I would recommend that you check these out. They're really good tools to use, and I use them a lot. It's great. So the next step is what someone never told me is like, well, where do I put all these videos that I'm putting together? How do I keep track of them all, and how do I keep them so that the students know where they're going when they're going? Of course, there's a lot of different things that you can use. Google Sites is one if you're Google Apps for Education. If your students already have email, Google's great. Google does have quite a bit of a steep learning curve, so that's kind of a toughie right there. And I didn't like how that all looked at the very end. The kids were having trouble figuring out how to use it. There's another one called Weebly.com. This is a good one. Some of my friends use this. It's a drag and drop, and you just take whatever you want and drag it into the thing. What I use is BlendSpace. This is one of my favorites because I can turn units on and off. And in the Google Sites, I can't really turn them on and off. This one I can. And then I have limited sharing options. So I can have whole bunch of different classes. I can make a BlendSpace for each of those, and then the students can go to them and get the videos, get the lectures, get all of that stuff, and even it'll put in YouTube videos, you can put in Google Docs, you can put in forms, you can put in all kinds of things. And so it's really user-friendly, and I really like this one. Also, the thing that I do with BlendSpace is I use CK12 as my textbook. And so what's really nice is I can put my, a section, that's what I love about CK12, is that I don't have to have this huge big textbook. I can say, we're working on friction. I want you to read this section on friction, and then take the little quiz that's associated with it in the CK12 website. So BlendSpace allows me to do all of that, which I really like. So time management. So one of the things is, holy cow, I'm a teacher. I don't have much time anyway. How much time does this stuff take? Well, when I made my first video, it took about an hour to create and edit a 3 to 4 minute video. As your learning curve gets better, as you get better, that will shorten down quite a bit. But it will take longer than you think it does, just to kind of get your head around this whole flipped classroom part. So my recommendation is to kind of try it out and do some of this over the summer and see if that you can make your learning curve a little less steep on that. The thing I do like about flipped classroom is that I can keep it to a point, and I don't have students interrupting me, taking me off on tangents or taking the whole class off the tangents, which is great. And it's made me a better lecturer because I don't go off on tangents, or if I do, I can just edit it out, which is awesome. They've told you that to try and keep your videos to under 4 minutes or less. If it's longer than that, you're probably rambling and the kids aren't going to get it anyway. Use lots of pictures, very visual type of presentation is what I've found that students now lead. And then the other thing is, do you really have to actually make a video? Is somebody else out there already done the work for you? And add that, put it in there. You don't have to do all the work. There's some really good videos out there for all different subject matters. Then the other thing I do is I keep a Google Doc for my lesson plan. So I want to make sure that if I find something somewhere that's really cool, that I can add it to a link, I can put it in there. I found this really cool activity, I want to put that in there, or just a time to reflect on teaching. I had my students do a Minute to Win It game recently, and one of the things I noticed that I have to walk them through how to play a game. So that was something that I was going to tweak and do for them. Now, here's the big question that people always ask me is, well, what do you do with homework? What if they don't watch the lesson? And that happens sometimes, it does. So if they don't watch the video at home, then I make them watch it in class while the others do an activity. And what I found is that only happens once, because the students want to do the fun activity. They don't want to sit around and have to listen to the video while everybody else is having fun and having a good time. Also, I guess it begs the question, what do you do now when they don't do their homework? Because I have students who don't do their homework now too. They just they lose that information. So you can either make them come in at a time, like during your office hours, and have them watch the video if that's a problem for them. But most of the time, it takes only one time for them to sit by themselves in the corner of a classroom and watch a video for them to come and do that. My colleagues have also told me that oftentimes, because we're all in lab partners or people do collaborative work in groups, that it really only takes one time for that one person not to do their homework, and the group gets on them. Says, dude, you got to do your homework. We all did it. Why not? So that's one of the things that happens as well. So how do we do yes?
We have a question from Heidi, and she'd like to know, do you purchase the paid version of BlendSpace? The education version.
Right. Currently, we do not. So I'm doing it all on the free version. But because I've curated so much on BlendSpace, I would definitely pay for it if I had an opportunity. Because I guess it's not that expensive, from my understanding.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for answering that.
Sure. Next is assessment. My thing for assessment is that you assess often and a little bit at a time. So I do a lot of formative assessments, and the thing to make sure is that you make it easy on you. So when I have an entrance ticket for the kids, for instance, I'll go back to that friction lecture that they had to watch last night. I'll get a half sheet of paper or a Google form or something, and when they enter, they have to give me that quiz, and then we exchange papers, and they correct it right there. I'm a big fan of that because students get to see what other students wrote down, and when they have a question about a quiz answer, we'll talk about how that wasn't a good answer and how it's difficult to understand what the person is saying and how we need more specificity on things. And it's been a great learning tool for my students in doing that. So have them have really short little quick questions, 3 or 4 answers. It doesn't have to be a long test. CK12 has a great quiz function on their site if you'd like to use that. And I think that Laura is going to give a demonstration of this later as well. And then, like I said, do peer grading. You don't have to grade each and every one of those things. Have them peer grade it. And then if a student has a question, I have them grade it, then they hand it back to each other, and if they have a question about how it was graded, I ask them to put a question mark next to their name, and then I just go through it when I'm entering those grades. I just go through it and look at it. And then I do worksheets on completion because I want them to try and give it a shot. So all I do is go through and say, did you complete the whole thing? And I stamp it and look at it, and they get full credit if they did it on completion. And then later on in the test is when I actually test them for their knowledge. So I look at it and I stamp it. We peer reviewed it or peer grade it. You can always have a peer grade each other's homework. And I was really surprised at how much better my students' worksheets got when they had to peer grade it, each other. They don't care if it's messy if I see it, but they care if their friend sees it who's messy. And then what to watch out for. You are probably going to get some resistance from students and parents. They think you're not teaching if you're not standing up in front of the class and spouting information, but really it's a better way of teaching. So you have to kind of think differently. And forcing a flipped classroom into a traditional classroom won't serve you very well. So you kind of have to really take that paradigm shift and make it, and then think activity in the classroom and think lecture at home. And so anything that is activity-based, that is collaborative, I do all of that in the classroom, from making a poster about friction with their friends to, a huge project, like I said, a minute to win it game kind of thing that they had to create. And then anytime I see a student in my classroom who's sitting there doing nothing, or they're doing it by themselves, then I know that's got to be done at home, not with me. Now, excuses. Okay. I think I've heard, through the last 3 years, I think I've heard every single excuse that possibly could happen, except for the dog ate my homework. So what do I do with that? Let's say they say, oh, well, my internet went out and I can't get that. A majority of the students have smartphones, or their parents have smartphones, so that's really not an excuse. The next one is, if they don't have technology at home, you can burn your lectures onto a DVD and hand it to them that way. Also, if there's libraries that have internet access all around. In fact, one of my students, he's so good at not giving me excuses and getting me a workaround, was that his internet went down last night. They went to Barnes & Noble. Mom and Dad got coffee. He finished his homework. So I gave him kudos and extra high fives for finding a workaround. So I always say, if they give me an excuse, I say, well, what's the workaround? That's always what we can do. On top of that, I give my students tech passes, because there are those times when their computer blew up, or their cat dumped water on their laptop, or something happened. So I give them 2 tech passes a quarter. Well, that's not true. Per semester, and that means that they can hand this in for their homework, but they have to know the content and knowledge later on, and so they get that one kablooey, it didn't work for me, those 2 text passes, and then if they don't use them and they find a workaround, I'll give them extra credit points for it. So I'm in junior high, so they love that extra credit point. They want to try and get that as much as possible. And I think that kind of ends my part of it, and I guess questions would be the next thing to have happen.
So we can answer a few questions, and then we're going to jump into a demo and show you how to use CK12 quizzes in your classroom. So do we have any questions?
What hardware do you use for video and problem solving?
Oh, excellent question. Thank you for asking. My hardware that I use is just my laptop. I have a Mac Air that I use, and then at school here I have a HP ProBook. The software that I use for it is TechSmith Camtasia. I really like that because it's, for me, it's very visual. I'm a visual learner, so I like it that way. But you can use Curation is another one that you can use. If you're a Chromebook school, you can do Screencast-O-Matic is another one. You know, that kind of thing. So I really like using that format.
Perfect. And another question, and this comes from Roxanne over chat. Earlier question that you responded to, Cheryl, regarding homework. She asks, does this mean that the homework takes 4 minutes if the students are watching the video, or if that's the only homework? And then follow-up to that, the follow-up to that is, so how many videos would you assign for one night?
For me, no, homework doesn't just take 4 minutes. Because for me, what I have is they watch a video, they have to do some reading, and then they have to do some review questions. So for me, my homework takes about 20 minutes total. So I'll have them watch my I'll have them watch my lecture, then they'll go and they'll do the reading out of the CK12, they'll answer the review questions, and then CK12 also has videos embedded into their process as well. So they're probably watching 3 or 4 videos at night and then answering review questions for me.
Awesome.
All right, well, it looks like that's all the questions we have. So we're going to show you a quick demo of how to use CK12 quizzes, how to assign them to your students, which will help in the flipped classroom. Cheryl mentioned them earlier. So I have Senior Manager of Implementation, Andy Sett, and he's going to go over how to use CK12 assignments.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Again, we thank you so much for your time. I'm going to go ahead and share my web browser, so give me just a moment. I'm going to first go ahead and click on Sign In, and I'll be asked to sign in with any one of my following social media accounts or potentially a CK12 account. And this is going to be a teacher account, so I'm going to go ahead and do so. So once I get in, we're going to take a look at how to assign CK12 practice within any of our CK12 groups. Now,
Andy, can I make a comment real quick?
Sure thing.
One of the things that I found is that if you can have your students sign in with a Google account, it makes it run so much smoother, because students will forget their passwords, they'll forget their usernames, but if you have them sign in, if they have a Google account already, then they're already put in there. And when you go as a teacher to look at their email, it's their Google email and not their random home email.
That's a perfect best practice. Thank you for that, Cheryl. So here on the teacher environment of CK12, the perspective, I'm going to click on the groups icon just at the top navigation. It's going to show all of the different CK12 groups that I've created over the course of time. And just before we dig into the how to assign, let me just expand a little bit on groups. So groups are really meant to mirror the physical classroom that you own as a teacher, as an educator. So let's say you've got your 25 students in the room and you want them to be organized in that same fashion. Within CK12, all you need to do is go ahead and click Create a Group and then invite those students. And just as Cheryl said, they can use their Google login information to go ahead and establish that account, get in, and now they'll be assigned and attached to that group. And they're going to have benefits beyond just tackling the assignments or any sort of reading content that you're pushing out to them. They're able to have dialogues with one another through our question and answer or discussions feature within CK12. We can always go into that a little later on, but let me show you the how to assign. I'm going to select one of the classes, one of the groups that I've already set up. It has a few members in there. You'll see that on the lower left where it says members, and then in that green, 11. And as a teacher, as an educator, I can click on assignments, still on that left side menu. And then if you look on the right, you've got the orange icon that says create an assignment. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Within CK12, as an educator, you can select from any number of our subjects and levels that we provide. You can search for them, or you can drill down by the subject level themselves. Let me just use algebra as our example today. Once I click on that level, you'll notice that we've got a number of topics available for my viewing. Let's say that I'm looking at the real numbers topic. Within that, there are 48 concepts available for my selection. Clicking on any of the titles will go ahead and place a checkbox on that far right to indicate I will add this concept to the assignment I'm building. Selecting the I or information icon will go ahead and present a preview for me as the educator, so I can see all the different types of content that's available. In this example, you see we have a number of videos and assessments. In other cases, you might see the read content, you might see flashcards, real-world applications, etc. So that's what we provide. Now, if I feel good about that concept, I can now click on Save. Create a name for this assignment. And then click on Save. Now, that's been created, but not yet assigned. Let's go ahead and click on the top left arrow to return back to our assignments list. We'll look at homework practice number 15. You'll notice that it has not been assigned. You can click on Assign right away if you wish, but I'm going to click on the downward arrow just to reveal a couple of options that you have. So you can set a due date, which will alert the students to when this assignment should be completed. And then should the teacher or educator want to edit or delete the assignment, you have the ability to do so. Edit could mean adding more or removing concepts, and deleting just means removing it. When I'm ready to, I can go ahead and just click on Assign, and then confirm it by clicking Assign within the pop-up. Once the screen reappears or refreshes, that assignment, homework practice number 15, has now been assigned, meaning that when students log in at any time after this moment, they will see an assignment appear in their dashboard, and they can go ahead and start to engage with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. Well, we want to thank Cheryl today for helping us with this webinar. It was really great to have you on, and we really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who joined the call. We really appreciate you. If you have any questions, you can always contact us at support. That's SUPPORT @ck12.org.